Can you hear?
She is. She's upstairs.
What?
So people are still joining. Class hasn't started yet. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me and see me. A couple of you are in already. Okay. What you can't see is all the people in person behind the computer.
Sweet.
People kind of used to it, and you can see more people joining now. But we'll turn the video off, and I'll resume it shortly. Otherwise, you're just going to be staring at me, which is okay, but we'll
Let's see.
Hello, everyone. We're still getting situated here in person, but just testing this. I think with that lighting, I think I actually will need to raise the lighting a little bit.
Emily.
Good,
Good. Good.
Yeah, do I need to, I didn't know if I needed to register for tonight.
I'll make a little one.
Yeah.
Y'all, there's chairs if you want them. I can grab pillows if you want those. Okay.
Actually, let me just grab them.
Okay. You, so.
Are there any
Well,
Well, it was for us.
Whatever, what's your name?
Maybe
if you wait up just a little bit, that way it's available.
I'll trade you some.
The better? But still close
And
enough.
then,
Yeah.
one of my friends that you met back. And now she's like, oh,
There you are.
oh, that's crazy. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you so much for showing up. Great to see so many friends here. I'll just give a brief introduction for Seth. I want to say that a series of synchronicities connected us, and I'm thrilled that he came into my life as a teacher of Chinese medicine. I had just completed a training with another teacher, and I completed everything he had. Kind of like the day that I knew that it was final, I got a phone call from Jeff Shermer, and she was like, and she introduced me. Welcome. Hey, Melissa.
Hi.
And so anyway, it's just like the universe delivered another teacher to me. I'm so grateful. Originally, Seth was going to teach me privately, and then it occurred to me that I wanted to share that opportunity with my friends and community. And so
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Just briefly, some of Seth's experience. He's been practicing as an acupuncturist for 8 years. He has a master's degree in Oriental medicine from Maryland University of Integrative Medicine.
Mhm.
He's been on that faculty as well, and also faculty at the University of
Doing pretty well. so-
Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia University of Integrated Medicine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then he taught he worked in Taiwan under Dr. Lee at a clinic for a year. And then he started a practice in Boise, which he just recently sold to come down here and open a practice. And so,
And it's an acupuncture?
Yep.
Good, I need a treatment.
Awesome.
Your appointment.
yeah. And then let's see. Oh, he also is a Chinese herbalist. And so I was just like,
So awesome.
cool. There's a lot for me to learn. If I learn, you know, small percentage I'll be. So anyway, thanks so much, Seth.
Thank you, Stephanie. And then do
Any
you want to
other
make an
questions?
announcement about the
Oh,
bathroom
yeah.
also?
So a couple things. Oh,
Bathroom.
there is a bathroom just right up the stairs and to the left. And then it's $25 a class or $80 for 4 classes this month. Cash and check are always great. And we liked Venmo more last year than we did this year, but it's still currency. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say about it.
Okay. We can talk more later. No. The IRS is on to us. Awesome. We'll just get situated here with the video. So welcome to those of you joining on Zoom. Welcome to those of you in person. My attention is on both of you, and then also welcome to those who are watching on the recording. So, and also with everyone here, maybe before everyone leaves, you can write your email address on a piece of paper in case you want to refer back to the recording later. So I'll send that out to everyone, the recorded lecture afterwards. So this is this overall class. We're going to be doing these weekly classes, and we've set the schedule for the month February here. And so this course is basically an introduction to Chinese medicine and thought. So this is designed for people who have no background in Chinese medicine, although there are some people joining us who are acupuncturists or have varying levels of familiarity with Chinese medicine. But it's supposed to be accessible to everyone with an interest or without any knowledge of Chinese medicine. So first of all, what is Chinese medicine when I'm saying Chinese medicine? Because we may not know what that is exactly. And so when I say Chinese medicine, basically this is medicine out of China, right? It comes from China originally. And when we're talking about Chinese medicine, there's different modalities that we might be referring to that are covered under that umbrella, right? So we can think about acupuncture, we can think about herbal medicine, cupping, gua sha, qigong, dietary therapy, all of these modalities within this umbrella of Chinese medicine. And so, it's worth mentioning too that like historically in China, they didn't think of this as Chinese medicine. This was just medicine, right? This was just medicine, the medicine that they used. And primarily, like when we do say the word Chinese medicine, zhongyi, Chinese medicine, we're usually talking about herbal medicine, actually. Like that's kind of like medicine. If you ask the average Chinese person, zhongyi, if you say that, they think about herbal medicine. But in this country here, Chinese herbalism is not really that well known or that popular. Acupuncture is actually more popular than herbalism. But so, it's worth saying that like we're looking today at YinYang theory. Okay. And so it's worth saying that like for me, I'm a Chinese medicine practitioner. So that's going to be like my lens that I'm coloring this explanation of YinYang through, versus if I was a historian or if I was an anthropologist, or, based on my lens, it will be a different presentation. If I was a sinologist and talking about the characters and the history of the characters and the interpretations of the words and the characters, that would be different than this. So this is through a Chinese medicine lens. So Yin-Yang theory is a good place to start. And so, by the way, like if questions come up, like feel free to ask questions, but you can also, there will be a time like before, probably we'll take a short break in the middle of the class, not a long break. It won't be like a, long socializing. That will happen afterwards because we want to stay focused. There's a lot of material to cover today. And so this class, I'll also just give a little bit of an overview of where we're going. Okay. So we can have an idea. So some of you have enrolled in the month, and some of you just, trying this class, and maybe we'll continue to follow up through the month. So week 1, this is Yin-Yang. Week 2 will be Taoism, introduction to Taoism, or the Tao. Make sure I can see this here. Week 3 is the intro to acupuncture. And then week 4 is going to be the introduction to the 5 elements, 5-element theory. So this is what we have lined up for the month. And then, I'll also mention here some ideas of some possible future classes, just things that I was thinking about. And, if anyone has any other input of things you're interested to learn, feel free to let me know and we can, take that into consideration. But some other possible future classes, because we want to do a weekly thing, is, a class on gua sha or cupping, these actual massage techniques, a class on the Tao or Tao of tea ceremony. We have a possible class on the I Ching, or the book, the I Ching or I Ching. We could talk about Taoist sexology or sexual practices from a Taoist perspective. Another possibility, illness as metaphor, something my teacher Jeffrey Yuan talks a lot about. And and then also another possibility is that it probably is where we're going after this, but it's still not set in stone. But possibly next month we'll be deeper into the 5 elements. So at the end of this month, we're doing an intro to the 5 elements, and then we'll do like a week on each of the elements: water, fire, wood, etc. So that's another possibility. And then some other possibilities of looking deeper into particular Chinese medicine texts. So that's kind of an idea of some of the future classes, and the classes do kind of build on each other. Like it will be such that if someone jumps in later, they'll still know what's going on. But if you follow up from week to week, you'll have a little bit more context and more understanding. So, okay. So in the Tao Te Ching, ancient Taoist text, it says the Tao gave birth to the one gave birth to the two, and the two gave birth to the 10,000 things, right? This is kind of basic, but kind of important. So the Tao gives birth to the one gives birth to the two gives birth to the 10,000 things. In Chinese, 10,000 basically means infinite. Okay, so when we're looking at yin-yang, this is basically, we're looking at this two space. So when we have oneness, or the Tao, the primordial void, Tao we'll get into next week what that means exactly, gives birth to the one, or oneness, just basically life itself, right? Or like what Hegel calls sense certainty. Just basically we have this phenomenon of life, but as soon as we start to try to understand life in any way, we try to make distinctions, we see then we have two. We have hot, cold, we have night and day. Basically two, or two-ness in cosmology, two-ness is where we have the beginning of distinctions. So this two-ness is what we're talking about. We're talking about yin-yang. And so it's this two-ness. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask as we go. So as we have like this two space or two-ness, we have the beginning of these polarities or the distinctions, right? Night and day, moon and sun. So first, as we start to understand yin-yang, let's look at these like possible polarities, right? So because you guys are familiar with this, with these concepts of yin and yang. And in Chinese, we say yin-yang, not really yang and yin, because they're together. They can't really have one without the other. We'll get into that in more detail and the properties of yin-yang. Here I'm writing yang-yin. But let's go through, and you guys can shout out like polarities, right? So one, like I said, is like day and night.
On, off.
On and off.
I also think of computer coding.
Right, binary, like 0, 1, yeah. So on, off. So we put it this way.
Dark light.
Dark light. So which one will go where?
Dark would be.
Dark would be here, right?
Feminine, masculine.
Feminine, masculine. Right, so male, female, we'll say.
And you're not just writing those randomly.
Right.
It really is.
It really is this
Right.
way, exactly, yes. And so, some might be like confusing or, which one goes where. And if you have any questions about these as we go, like why is this on this side or this on this side? So basically, and you'll start to kind of understand what these are through these associations. So these are yang, these are yin.
Like positive and negative.
Yeah, positive and negative, right.
So I'm trying to think negative would be the.
Negative would be probably yin, right?
Okay.
Why are females negative?
That's a deeper conversation. Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't want to alienate anyone yet. Receptive, active versus receptive, right?
Oh,
So, yeah. So also hot and cold.
Sun and the moon.
Sun and moon. These are important ones.
Electric and magnetic.
Electric and magnetic, interesting. So yeah, I would probably put electric here, magnetic here, right? Extroversion, introversion, or like expansion, contraction, right? Or exterior, interior, right?
Yeah.
You want to share some thoughts about that, electric and magnetic?
Just the feminine
electric.
Another key thing about all of these is that you can't have one without the other. So like an electromagnetic field, you can't really have an electric field without a magnetic, like when you have one, it implies the other. So that's what all of these, like you cannot have hot without cold, you can't have activity without receptivity. You can't have exterior without interior.
It's like magnetic. It's receiving.
So we went through a lot of the ones that I wanted to say. Another good one is like energy and matter, or energy and form, we can say. Any others that come to mind? Dry and wet, we can say also. Dry would be here. Wet would be here. We have.
What about emotion and intellect? Intellect.
Yeah, that would be also, yeah, intellect and
Okay,
emotion.
Dry and wet, help me understand.
But not
next word.
intellect, but
Mhm.
practical versus emotion.
Right, totally, yeah. So dry and wet, so as we understand more about yin, also in the medical context, it'll make more sense.
Like dampness
But
and like-
yes, dampness is on this side. Dampness is a yin substance, whereas like wind would be a yang substance. If we can think about those, and hot, right, a yang substance, cold would be a yin substance, right? We can also think about, like, not to be crude, but I think it is helpful, like we can think about the anatomy, like male anatomy, penis, vagina, like, so you can think in your mind about like the properties of those things. It helps you, right? One is more internal, one is external, right? One is dry, one is wet, one gets hard, one is soft, right, etc. We go through, but that is helpful, right? Anatomy as a reflection of this yin yang principle. So when we're talking about yin yang, right, like these are properties of the world at large, of the earth, of the universe, and properties of humanity as well. So this is an important concept in Chinese medicine, that it's not separate. Like these, how we look at the world, how we look at nature, the cycles of the seasons, is how we look at human beings as well. And each one informs the other one. Understanding the human informs the understanding of the world. Understanding the world informs the understanding of humanity as well. Okay. And there's so many more, right? We can go through so many different things. Like we can literally apply this to everything. This is seeing the world through polarities. This is seeing the world through the lens of two-ness.
It's like when you see like a vibration, like the up and down.
Yes.
Hills and valleys.
Yes. So that's another one also that brings to mind also, like shady and sunny. Actually, the characters of yang and yin, the character of yang points to the sunny side of the mountain, and yin points to the shady side of the mountain. So
Seth,
yeah.
I think I see a question in the chat thread.
Yeah, so we'll get to would alive and dead. Yeah, alive and dead, absolutely. And by the way, the chat thread, I may not get to them as we go, but we will answer them at least at the end when we come to a break. But yeah, alive and dead. Yeah, life and death, right? Life and death, right?
Acid, alkaline.
Acid, alkaline, right? And here this way, acid, alkaline, right? Exactly. And these are all helpful. These are all helpful because then when we do, depending on what lens we're looking at a medicine lens, we can understand acidity and alkalinity through this lens. Like if I eat a really acidic diet, I'm going to be more yang. If I eat a very alkaline diet, I'm going to be more yin, right? So if I have a tendency to be more of a yang person, I might want to have more of a yin diet or do more yin activities, right? And this will make more sense as we continue to go on. But yeah, all like the more we talk about these polarities, it helps to paint in the picture.
What would you think if I dim the lights a little bit?
It interferes with this, yeah, because we need the lighting for the video, unfortunately, yeah.
Can you make any more sense of life and death? I would think that life would be
Mm-hmm.
on the female side.
Well, so this is, again, when we just put polarities, it's not like death equals femininity or anything like that, or femininity equals death. But when we just look at this lens of polarities, like life is moving, life is activity, life is, and death is the retreating of activity. And so, like women also have this capacity to bring forward life from nothing to actually birth. So they're actually like a conduit from death to life in that way. But yeah, like it's not forward act, but forward action would be more masculinity, upward, right, and downward, inward would be more femininity.
So the feminine giving birth would be
Mhm.
the yin within the yang dot of that.
Right. Yeah, very good. Yeah, so that would be like the yang emerging from the yin, and we'll get into that shortly. Yeah, so we're gonna look very soon at the yin yang symbol.
How would you tie in like Adam and Eve to that?
I won't go there right now. Too big of a concept, but we can talk about that later. But Adam will be on. Adam will be on. Yeah. And so also interesting, like the rib, right? The structure coming out, like this very physical thing. But without that, I actually haven't thought about it a lot. But interesting question.
There's probably a lot within that.
For sure. So yeah, next we'll look at, before we look at more characteristics of yin yang, we'll look at the actual, this famous symbol, right? What's called the Taiji symbol. So first of all, when we have this circle, this is oneness. Okay, not differentiating, not going into two-ness. A circle represents this unity, oneness, undifferentiated, right? Every point is the same, it's all one. La-di-da, this is oneness, right? But remember, we said the Tao gives birth to the one gives birth to the two. I'll also mention like this Enzo, this symbol that's very famous in Taoism, especially of the unconnected or unfinished one. So this is like the one that's harkening back to the zero, or harkening back to the Tao, harkening back to this chaos. So it's unfinished. So this is like kind of, we can say this is like represents the Tao, right? And this represents oneness, the circle. But then when we differentiate into two, then we have this two-ness, where we have and there's many different versions of this. This is the one that's contemporary and most famous. Oh, I did that wrong. Well, I'm going to redo it anyway. But this is what's called the Taiji symbol. What we call in the West the YinYang symbol. Kind of entered into the like Western awareness in the 1960s. But versions of this have been around since the Song Dynasty in like the year 1100 in China. Right, so this is the yang side. This is the yin side. Right, so this kind of famous symbol, which we see all the time, which kind of like doesn't even really have any meaning anymore because it's just all over the place. So, but it is actually deeply meaningful. So we're gonna look at what it actually means.
1100.
Yeah, so yeah, so I mean, definitely this concept is much older, but this sort of depiction that I was reading recently that actually like they've seen this symbol in Roman shields, like in ancient Rome, they had this exact symbol in like the 2nd century. So this symbol is not like, yeah, it's interesting how like this is common in different cultures. These symbols pop up even among cultures that have no relationship with each other, right? Like the swastika, this image that had like, became this, certain symbol of, of Nazism, is a symbol in Buddhism, and meaning something totally different. So, there's these symbols across different cultures. Yes, we'll explain all of it. Yeah, so, so first of all, this is called the Taiji symbol in Chinese, Taiji symbol, which means utmost extreme, Taiji, because it shows how yang and yin transform into each other. Okay, so yeah, many variants throughout history. The first diagram that we see of something that looks very much like this is from the Song Dynasty, philosopher Zhou Denis. But many variants throughout history. This current version, something that looks like this, more began in the Ming Dynasty in China in the 1500s. This exact kind of symbol with these two interlocking spirals. Okay, so now let's understand this more. So first we'll look at over the course. Yeah, maybe close it. Yeah. Sorry. So this is the yin side, right? Dark, right? And this is the yang side, light. And then we see the yin within the yang and the yang within the yin, right? And so what this represents actually is not like a static symbol, but is actually a state of nature, of transformation. This represents transformation. So if we look at yang, as yang continues to rise, eventually it reaches its apex here, the maximum yang, that it then starts to transform into yin. Right, so when we get to maximum yang, it transforms into yin. When we get to maximum yin, it begins to transform into yang. That's one thing that it conveys, is this concept of transformation. When something becomes really yang, it will then go to yin. Has to. Law of nature. Not a concept, it's actually a law of nature. We'll see that in a second. So when something becomes so yang, it will become yin. When something becomes so yin, it will become yang. Necessarily, always. And so then we have also this concept that there's no such thing as like absolute yang. Even within absolute yang, there is yin. Even within absolute yin, there is yang. So when we look at this moment here, where we have this something that's so yin that it becomes yang, let's think about this in the concept of the day. Okay, so what time of day would this be? Right, because every day we have this whole cycle, right, of like light, dark, this whole cycle of light going to dark, dark going into light. Every single day we go through this cycle. So what would be this point here?
Sunrise.
Sunrise is one thought.
Because it could be sunset.
Sunset.
Or as you say, right, it goes to it, then that would be sunset going to night.
Sunset going into night.
It seems like middle of the day, like 12 noon. is
Yes.
shifting.
Exactly. So actually, I will explain this. So this is actually noon. Why? Why? Because this is a time when it's the most light. When is the most? When is there the most light? The most count? And then it has to go at this point at noon. It doesn't really seem like it, but it's actually getting dimmer slowly. And then there is this other major point,
About 4 in the morning.
right? So here. So this is yang. Oh, I did it wrong. This is yang. This is actually, so this is the maximum yang transforming into yin, right? So this is noon. Sorry to confuse people. So this is noon, right? Because this is the maximum yang. So much yang, and then it's becoming yin.
So the
This
other
is
one
the
would be
point.
like midnight.
Yeah, this would be midnight.
Okay.
Sorry to confuse people. I got led astray. So this would be like midday. I'm not really noon, right? Because it depends on what time we are here, but midday. And this would be midnight. And then we have here, then we have sunset, right? So this is the moment when, look, the yang and yin influences are equal, right? If we see, like, if we do a cross section here, we see there's equivalent. Like if we do a cross section here, right, versus a cross section here. So this is where all the yin is becoming into all the yang is turning into yin, and then here is where the influences are equal, right? So at sunset, and then at sunset, all of a sudden now it's more yin than it is yang. Until the maximum yang, which is the middle of the night, and then all of a sudden you can't see it yet, but the yang influences are starting to emerge. Until we get to here, sunrise, right? When all of a sudden now the yang influences are more prevalent as we go, right? Here, so here is where we have more yang than yin, right? Here is where we have more yin than yang. And then these areas are kind of like these nodes where it's equivalent, right? Because there's a moment where the sun is setting where it's equally light and dark. And there's a moment when the sun is rising where it's equally light and dark. Okay, so now let's look at it in the context of the year, seasonal cycle. So we have the daily cycle. This happens every day. And then this also happens every year, right? So then these would be when is everything equal? Equinox, right? So this would be the sunrise. This would be the vernal equinox, right? So spring equinox, spring equinox, spring equinox, and this would be the autumn equinox, right? So and then what would this be?
Solstice.
Which solstice?
Winter.
Winter solstice. So why is the solstice celebrated in cultures throughout the world, and Christmas aligns around the solstice? Why? Because this is the return of yang qi, right? This is when it's so yin, but then yang, even though we can't really tell, it's in the dead of winter, it's freezing cold, and really actually in our calendar that we say that's the beginning of winter. But actually, in the way the Chinese look at it, that's the height of winter because it's the darkest time of year. That's not the beginning of winter. That's actually the height of winter. That's when it's darkest. That's when it's the most yin part. so that's actually the middle of winter, not from the Chinese perspective, right? So then we have that time of year, winter, and then we have, you know, the winter solstice, and then at this node, springtime, when it's equal forces of yin and yang. Okay, so another way to look at this is with these lines, these kind of lines, where we have the sunrise, right? So this is yang emerging from yin, right? Because it's the yin time, coming out of the yin time into the spring, when yang is springing forth from yin. So the way we represent that is this. So the broken line represents the yin, the solid line represents yang. So this is from yin giving birth to yang. So that's the springtime here. That's what the springtime is like, right? The winter time is yin within yin, right? That's yin within yin. And then we have this time, the, you know, summer solstice, right? So summer. And this is yang within yang, maximum yang. But the thing is, this implies that it's becoming yin, right? Because when something is so yang, it has to go yin, right? What comes up must go down. This is an essential feature of life. And it becomes very profound, actually, when we look at, you know, human life and activity and rest and all these kind of things. So this is yang within yang. And then here we have the reverse. This is where the yang is giving birth to yin. The yin influences are starting to gain control. So these are these, and of course now like things get a little bit shifted in terms of based on where you are in the world, right? But everywhere in the world goes through these cycles, right? If you're close to the equator, it's relatively more yang, but they still go through these cycles, just not as extreme, right? If you're at the poles, still go through these cycles, just more yin relatively, right? And now we can say as a, you know, if we think about like climate change and things like that, we're getting overall more yang, right? Things are getting more warm overall, but still going through these cycles, right? So this kind of helps us understand several properties of yin yang, that the one transforms into the other, that one is contained within the other, right? Even in the darkest time of night, it's becoming light. Even though that yang influence is hidden, it's still there, right? So even in the depths of winter, that yang qi is still there. It's just not like apparent, and it's not what has the influence. What has the influence is yin qi, right? So I mean, we can say a lot more about following the cycles of the seasons, right? And if this is more yin time of year, maybe we should be more yin. Yang time of year be more yang, etc. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Any questions about this part?
Can you give like an example when you say you should be more that in that season?
Yeah.
Like,
So, well, you
say
can
more.
say, well, yeah, good, yeah. So we can say it
What
like
would that look like?
it both ways. So like one, if we want to live in line with the cycles of the seasons, right? Like just like, let's look at it first within a day. Generally at nighttime, we want to sleep. That's the yin time of day. We want to do the yin activity, which is rest. So that when the yang qi rises in the morning, we can have our yang qi rising as well and start to do activity. And then, you know, you have some people who are working the night shift and then it's like topsy-turvy and they have some health issues because of that, because it's unnatural. And so, you know, that's the cycles of the day. Cycles of the season, you know, if we don't respect the cycle of the season, and when it's the winter time and we're doing a lot of activity, we're really active, that can harm us. That can cause issues. And the you know, the ancient Chinese texts go into all the details about what happens when you don't follow the cycles of the seasons, how it manifests specifically. So we can say, on the one hand, we want to follow the seasons because when I think winter is a good example. If we exhaust ourselves in the winter, we're doing all this activity, there's not as much yang qi available out in the world, right? There's not enough light. There's not that much light. Well, if we try to work a 12-hour day in the winter, it might not be as easy as if we try to work a 12-hour day in the summer. We're not going with the cycles of the seasons because that yang qi is not available around us in the world. And so, you know, it would behoove us to follow this cycle and say, okay, it's the winter time. All of nature is going internal. I should go internal, right? Hibernation. Other animals, if you know, animals are not sleeping as much in the summer as they are in the winter, right? On the other hand, we also want to counterbalance the influences of that season, right? Like in the winter, we don't want to necessarily jump in cold snow. Some people do that, and that's a whole cult around it at this point. But what's more like natural because we want to fight that influence. We don't want to expose ourselves to cold. It's naturally already so cold. We want to counteract that with heat. right? So that's why also in the season, we want to, like, if it's cold out, we want to drink more hot drinks. We want to drink, we want to eat hot food, right? So versus in the summer, we naturally gravitate in the summertime, we're going to have iced drinks, like we're going to have popsicles, right? Because we want to also achieve balance within those seasons. So like both are true. Overall, we want to go with the flow of the seasons and follow the cycles of nature, but we also want to make sure that that influence doesn't have too much influence, right? So that's like kind of mitigating that, right? So like that, and so, but we don't really have a concept of this, like, right? When we go to the restaurant in the middle of winter, they serve us ice water all the time, right? Probably because our culture is so young that everyone needs to cool off. But not so much. Like we really should be having hot water. So in China, they never serve cold water, never ice water, nothing, never ice water. Even in the dead of summer, the hottest day, they drink room temperature at the coldest. They will never, that's just them. That's a whole nother thing in Chinese medicine, because we don't want the stomach and spleen to get cold, right? Because we want that yang qi to be active to digest the food. So when we douse our stomach with cold, that's interfering with the transformative aspect of the digestion, right? We need our digestion to be strong and transformative. And when we put an ice blanket on it, it's not going to be so strong.
They do the same thing in Ayurveda.
Yeah, Ayurveda, they don't like ice. But that's as a general rule. So we don't want to also get trapped in that, because if someone has really excess yang and they're really like hot, sweating all the time, they would be okay actually to have, they would naturally gravitate toward ice cold drinks. But overall, in our culture, we don't really think about it. It's just like, oh, you're at the table, you're drinking ice cold water. Maybe okay for some, more okay for some if they have a very yang constitution, right? They have red face, tendency toward heat, sweating, etc. What we call yang ming constitution, they would be okay for cold drinks. But if we have someone else who tends to be more cold, either deficient type or that they just have too much cold in their body, they should have more hot beverages, food, etc. Some people, this raw diet might be good for some people who have too much yang, but for many other people, it's not so good. Weakens their digestive capacity, transformative capacity of the digestion, because that transformative capacity of the digestion, that's a yang function, transformation, right? We'll get into that a little bit later. Any questions on that though, before we continue? Transformative is yang qi, because we could also look at like another one of these distinctions, like metabolic, like metabolism is yang, right? And then the kind of result of metabolism or nutrition is yin, the actual substance, right? So again, like this kind of function and form, right? So the yang relates to transformation.
It would be nice for culture to slow down a little more in the winter, and you could like
For sure.
show up to work later. And
It's not as natural to work such a long day in the winter.
I mean, I adjusted my personal schedule.
Mhm. Right. Not all of us can do that. Some people, many people cannot do that. So they have to just push. Okay. I'm going to go over these characteristics. I can leave this up for now. These characteristics of yin yang. I'm not going to go into like so much detail, but I'm just going to go over these 4 characteristics. I guess I will actually write them up here, because this can also help us.
Question about so in China, like
Yeah.
Is the work schedule like?
No, they're still the same, like, maybe once, that, in agricultural times, but now it's the same as it is here. Yeah. They have some relics of the old culture, in terms of like, they have the Chinese New Year, which is this year. That's why I have this pomelo here, because it's a symbol, good luck, famous food, Chinese pomelo that we eat in the time of the New Year. So now it's Chinese New Year. The Chinese New Year was just this past Tuesday, right? Or Monday, Tuesday, the 1st. Tuesday was New Year's Day. Monday was New Year's Eve. So then again, looking at this, it's the New Year is different, because this is actually the beginning of spring, the return of the yang qi. That's the springtime, where the yang qi is actually really, so that again, it's different. Everything's a little bit different, because they shift. Again, the winter solstice is the height of winter, not the beginning of winter. So everything shifted a little bit. So that's why the Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year, they celebrate around this time of year. So this is the time of the New Year, which is the beginning of spring in the Chinese calendar. So now we're technically in spring.
So does the waxing and waning of the moon follow yin yang as well?
Right. So we can look at that as a whole. But we did mention sun and moon as in general, sun being more yang, yin being, yeah, but the phases as well. So what within that, like if we look at anything, and break that in pieces, we can also see, so like with the moon, right? Like the new moon being the yin part of the cycle, the full moon being the yang part of the cycle, right? And so that within women as well, with their moon cycle, right? Like when we have the estrogen, which is a yang hormone, right? That part of the cycle versus, oh, sorry, I said the estrogen. Progesterone is the more yang substance versus estrogen more yin, right? So we can look at, that cycle as well of, that women go through the same cycle where the yang influence is strongest when the progesterone is high, and, like that.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So empty, full,
Mm-hmm.
that relates to full moon.
New moon. Like if we want,
So which is which? The
so full
is
moon would be
more
yang, right? Because think about it, it's more bright,
Right.
right? And then yin, the new moon is maximum yin, darkness. And so, like then the menstrual cycle, right? Like that would be the menstrual part of the phase is the new moon. That would be the menstrual part, right? And then the ovulation would be the full moon.
No.
That's the most yang part, ovulation, creation, right? That's the fertility time. So that is helpful to think about. So like, in Chinese medicine, for example, if a woman has a problem with the ovulation part, if there's no temperature rise, more than likely she's yang deficient, kidney yang deficient, probably. So we need to tonify yang versus, and well, we can go really in depth into the menstrual cycle as a whole topic, but just for this purpose of right now, just to know that within that cycle, it has the same cycle of yin and yang, right? When the ovulation being the yang part, menstruation being the yin part, right?
So just give us a teaser. What would you do to?
Mm-hmm. So for yang, so tonify yang. Yeah, so we will look at that later today. So we'll look at just in general, like there's a representative herb that we'll look at for the representative yang tonic. There's so many herbs that are yang tonic, so many herbs that are yin tonic. So we'll look at one today, representative.
Another good class, just saying.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, we will get into that. Okay, so let's look at, we'll take a break after a short break, 10 minutes maximum, after we cover this, which is the characteristics of yin yang. Okay, so this is going to get a little bit kind of conceptual or theoretical. I'll try to just keep it brief or easy, but we'll just go through these. So we have these are the characteristics of yin yang. Yin yang as a unit. This might be getting hard for the people online to see with this thing, but we have mutual consumption.
Okay, men have a cycle as well, correct?
Men have their own cycle as well. I mean, a little bit different, that but like, and we'll look at also later. I was going to do an example of like
Isn't there more daily, like a 24-hour?
right. Some say that. So then again, men are more aligned with the sun, the cycle of the sun, right? Women are more aligned with the cycle of the moon, right? Moon is a 28-day cycle. Sun is a 1-day cycle. So like that. So
That's why they need sex like every day.
Yeah.
well, actually, that's a good question. That's more into the Taoist sexology class. But with that, it depends on the age and the constitution.
Okay.
So there's actually tables in Chinese medicine. It's like you can line yourself up like, okay, it's more for men actually, because for men is more significant how often you're having sex. Why? Because when men ejaculate, they're losing this jing in Chinese, they're losing this essence, versus women, when they have sex, they're losing a little bit of fluids perhaps, but they're not really losing as significant for men. Women are losing their essence every time they ovulate or like going through the menstrual cycle, but men lose their essence when they ejaculate. So it becomes this balance of like, you don't want, like, so Taoists will take this to the extreme of like, we don't want to lose any essence. Instead of ejaculating, we're going to recycle it through the microcosmic orbit, up the spine, down here, and keep it. So you actually can do that. You can actually do that. You can, and then as a man, you can have a full body orgasm in sex. So that's a practice, Taoist practice. So, that's a whole another topic again for the Taoist sexology class. But, just with that, we can just say that with that, there's a table, like basically, and of course the table is just a standardized, it might be different based on someone's constitution. If they have a very strong constitution, a lot of jing allotments, and there's ways to tell if you have a strong constitution or a weak constitution. But But apart from that, there's like a standardized of like, okay, if you're like 18 years old, man, like this is how many times you should be having sex a week. If you're a 50-year-old man, this is how many times, and it's not equal, right? And so we want to, like, as we age, we want to be like having sex like we were when we were like 20 or 30, but it's not good. It's not natural. It's, you know, so we again have to go through the cycles, right? That's like if we're getting to, it's just like we want to believe that we're not aging, but we are. You know, so it's like that's like equivalent of like if we're in this time of year, autumn, but we want to just like, oh no, I don't want to go there. I'm going to do more and more activity, but actually what you're doing, you're getting further to there, right? So like you want to fight aging by doing more yang activities, but we'll see in a second that becomes more yin, right? If you're doing more yang activities, you're kind of doing the opposite actually. So on the other hand, if you do the opposite and you say, oh no, I'm not going to have any sex or any ejaculation, that has its own problem, because then you can create stagnation, because men need to actually have this release. Unless they're a master of Taoist sex practices that they're able to recycle it, very difficult to do. Very difficult to do.
We'll take your word.
Yes, you can take my word for it. Okay. And so this is why, like, you know, they're getting a little off track, but I just mentioned it's interesting. You know, like priests or celibates, like people who are celibate, much higher incidence of prostate cancer. Why? Because they're not releasing, they're not ejaculating often. I mean, some of them still are, but they're supposed to not, right? I mean, they're celibate, but that doesn't mean they're just masturbating all the time. They're not supposed to be, right? They're supposed to be channeling that energy to God, which you can do to an extent, right? You can transform that essence into pure spirit. That's the idea, but it's very difficult to do. And so, you know, what is happening is that all this buildup is happening there without release, that they're creating stagnation. They're creating all this heat. That heat is siphoned into where? The prostate, because the prostate is basically a hollow organ that can store. Well, yeah, so then we'll also mention, going back to the list of the polarities, hot, cold, one other thing that we can mention is hollow organs versus solid organs. This becomes more relevant in Chinese medicine, but we have the hollow organs, or the fu, which things pass through. Those are more yang, open, versus the solid ones, more form, that are more yin. So, you know, the intestines, for example, are more yang, more prone to excess, right? Versus the solid organs, the viscera, the heart, the kidneys, the spleen, etc., that are solid, that are more yin. Those are the yin organs, which are actually in medicine, they're more important. Actually, the yin organs are overall more important than the, yes. Yes, because things pass through them. Again, the storage capacity. They're more if we think about the yin organs, the viscera, they're more solid. They store substances, so that's yin. That's receptive, right? Like the liver stores the blood, for example. Liver stores the blood. That's a yin property, right? Kidneys store what we call the jing, right? Versus the bladder, which is the other water element organ. The bladder, things pass through it. So, you know, just like men are more prone to excess, women are more prone to deficiency. In the yang organs, the fu, are more prone to excess. It's more of a problem if things build up, right? Think about too much in the stomach or too much in the intestines. We can't really have a deficient intestine so much. I mean, it's like if it's deficient, that means it's like moving through. It is possible, kind of, but more common that they're prone to excess. Right. So anyway, that's getting a little off track. You had a question?
So I was just, it was more going back to the sex question about
Mm-hmm.
ejaculation. So if they're ejaculating every single day,
Yeah.
then is that like, where would they say the balance is between the yin and yang?
Well, if you're 18, that could be fine.
Probably good.
But if you're, you know, 58, that's,
Depends on your constitution.
it does depend on your constitution, but still, like, it will vary a bit, but you still want to follow that cycle, that
Because
you
I
want to be
know,
ejaculating
like,
less.
guys
And you
that
can
get
still be having
prostate
sex.
cancer and they're
Yes.
having sex every day.
Right. So it's not only that they have too much heat in the body, or it's not always heat, but often heat and dampness. So that dampness or heat could be coming from the diet, not just from sex, right? It could be from the diet, could be from their constitution, could be from their emotions, could be from different things of why they're, so like prostate cancer doesn't always mean they're not ejaculating enough, but that can be one cause, because that can create that stagnation.
How do you look at the Constitution?
That we'll get into, especially when we go into the 5 elements. But in a basic sense, with the yin yang part, because this is just the basic differentiation, right? You could say someone has a more yang constitution, a more yin constitution, right? So more yang constitution, we would look at all those correspondences here, like they would be more prone toward heat. they would be more red, they would be more active, they would, versus someone who's more of a yin constitution would be more quiet, there would be more tendency toward cold, etc. It becomes like not like kind of clinically useful, but not so much because it's not really that sophisticated of a differentiation. The 5-element differentiation is a little bit more sophisticated. And then we have other constitutional systems that we can use. But in a basic sense, yin yang, we would just go through like that, like there, all those yang correspondences, the person's more
Well,
active,
it's just like
more
with
heat.
it's the two-ness.
Right.
You only have these two.
We only have this, so it
differentiations.
can be useful,
So
but
you
it can,
go to the 10,000.
yes.
And then you can be
well,
more
then it gets very
detailed.
tricky. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So then we don't want to get to 10,000 because then it's pure chaos. We want to get to like more numbers that are, like 5.
More differentiation.
9 is the most beloved number because yang is so as we go in terms of numerology, all the odd numbers are basically like elaborations of oneness, and all the even numbers are elaboration of two-ness, in a sense. So 9 is really beautiful from a Taoist perspective because it's all about transformation. It's very yang, almost to 10, which is completion, but not quite there yet. So 9 was like the most popular number because it's like so young. But then people got clever and they're like, well, 9 is almost 10, but 8 is almost 9. So actually 8 is even better because that's like right almost to it. So then 8 became the new 9 in China. So in China, like the number 8 is there, people are obsessed with 8. Like you'll see everywhere, like if you try to get the phone number 888-88888, it will be like, $10,000 because that's very coveted. So like, yeah, like common, like if you go to cafe, or like what's the Wi-Fi? Let's say Bagaba, like which is like 8 8s. And you're like, oh, of course, yeah. So 8, you type 8 times, that's the Wi-Fi. Yeah, as well. Yeah, as well. Totally. Yeah.
I have to tell my daughter who's doing Chinese dual immersion.
Okay.
Like junior high.
Yes.
But her birthday is
Oh.
August 8th.
8. So that's
2008.
very auspicious.
So, yeah.
Yes. So that would be like very, very auspicious because 8 is like the most auspicious
Yeah.
number.
They don't like it.
Yes.
One last time on the organs.
Yes.
Solid organs like the heart.
Yes.
That's
Those are yin organs. Even though it's a little tricky because the heart is relatively in the cycles of the 5 elements, heart is a fire organ. So it's more yang within the yin, but in
Also, it's
general,
like receiving blood and then pumping it out. So
it's
like
more
a lot
yang.
of both actions.
It has
right?
both. Yeah. So it's the most yang of the yin. It's
So-
associated with the summertime.
would you, this translates into certain herbs?
Yeah.
that would
Totally.
help these specific
Yep.
organs?
Yep, exactly. So we have herbs that would be, good for certain organs, like certain herbs that are like very much like a liver herb. But then when we look at it a little more, it's like, okay, well, what does it actually do for the liver? This is like we get caught in this trap a little bit of like, oh, I wanted some liver herbs. Well, whose liver? Like, what do we want to do with the liver, right? Do we want to nourish the liver blood? Do we want to move the liver qi? And so the heart, it's like, what do we want to do? Do we want to nourish the heart because it's weak, it's deficient? Or is there too much heat? We want to clear heart heat. It depends on what the actual pathology is. Yeah, so that's like more complicated, but yeah, we'll get there too.
There's a question about the yang and heat. As a massage therapist,
Hmm.
there's like a huge difference between you have a man on the table, he's gonna be hot.
Generally.
The heat around, he's not gonna want hot rods very
Yes.
often, etc. The women, they want every
In
single-
general,
they
yeah,
want
because
the-
they're more yin.
Yeah, and I wondered how much of
Yeah.
a factor that was like just mass, or if it's constitutional.
It's both. Like it's like, and so whenever we have these polarities, we don't want to get stuck in thinking, oh, man equals hot, woman equals cold. In general, yes, but then there's always, there's women who run hot all the time. There are, right? Like not just menopausal, but there are women who run hot constitutionally. There are men who run cold, for sure. But as a general rule, men, because they're more young, they tend to be more hot. Women, because they're more young, they tend to be more cold. So there is that trend, and then it will kind of depend. A lot of variation within, yeah. So, okay, let's take a short break here, actually, at 8, and we'll. Right.
It's like, whoa.
It is, yeah, it is. But then, yeah, there's always exceptions. I think we're gonna do that after the break because this is gonna take a little bit, and it's 8 o'clock. So we're gonna take a 10-minute break. We're gonna start promptly at 8:10. I'm gonna just start, even if people aren't ready. I'm just gonna start at 8:10 because we have a lot more material to cover. So we'll take a short break. If anyone has any questions, who's in the online, you can ask the questions, then we'll answer them when we start class back up again at 8:10 Mountain Standard Time.
Okay, and there are two bathrooms, they're both up the stairs to the left. There's one in the bedroom and there's one around the corner in the back.
Can I ask a question about that?
About what?
Number four.
Uh-huh.
Kind of, they were saying
Yeah.
that they don't like, so you're
Yeah.
saying it's so good.
Yes, very good question. Yeah, so I'll do it on this next time. So we have the number 4, which in Chinese looks like that. The way we say this is "s," but "s" is a homonym for death. So if we have, I can't remember the other. So because Chinese is a tonal language, there's different tones. So we have like in the way we say 4 is "s," but then if we say third tone, it means death. So that's why the number 4 is considered unlucky in Chinese because it has this association with death. So just like we have the like 13, the number 13 we don't like. They don't like the number 4. So like if you go to a bank, they won't have the teller number 4. You would just skip that. Even on floors in buildings, they would have sometimes floor 1, 2, 3, 5. They wouldn't call the 4th floor floor 5. Like this literally happens. Like you'll look in the elevator, there's no 4th floor. They do that.
I know.
So that's why. That's actually because of the language. So Chinese has a lot of like homonyms where like if you say it in a different way, it gets really interesting with like poetry and all these things because there's all this wordplay that happens. Yeah. Yeah. But interesting. 8 is really lucky, which is like 4 times 2. Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what I mean? And I don't have to worry about that. So it's like yeah.
No, I don't know why it's not better. It's the exact same. It's like there's this light coming from here, but now there's not even a light coming from there. It's the same. Oh, it's actually coming from here now. It's mirrored, yeah. So it's not, yeah. Yeah, it's actually this way. Let me see it. So this doesn't. That's okay.
And my body's like,
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like
And so.
No.
I feel like it's safer because that's the plan that's in my-
Yeah. Interesting. Well, not right now.
Just the thing is, I.
And what's your name? Larry. So, nice to meet you. I haven't yet opened my clinic. So I just sold my clinic in Boise. Moved here. TBD. Yeah. So yeah. But in the next couple of months. I will. Yeah, we'll send around. Maybe I'll actually have something yet. We're going to send around an email for the Zoom recordings, and then we'll also be in touch about it.
Well, like that, or I could.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So where were you?
Yeah, just sold my practice up there, and now here. So yeah, my number. My number is 201. 329.
It's hard.
2110. Yeah, so why don't you shoot me a text also, and with your name, and I'll add you. Last name is Shamon, S-H-A-M-O-N. Thank you. 2 minutes. Okay, so 2 minutes until we start class. Okay, so 1 minute until we start class. I'm good, thank you though.
Go get some tea. What do you want? I do. What do you want? Just pick one. I'll get you one.
Here's your blank.
Julie.
There's a pile. Okay, all right.
Okay, here's your choice.
Okay, it's 8:10. Let's get back to our chairs and seats and couches and start. Okay, so these are the 4 characteristics of yin yang. And this is yin yang as a unit, right? Not yin and yang. This is characteristics of yin yang, this whole yin yang thing. So number 1, I'm not going to go in order, actually. I wrote it in the wrong order. But number 1, mutual opposition. Mutual opposition. Okay, so they oppose each other. Yin opposes yang, yang opposes yin. They're kind of like fighting, or we can say like dancing with each other. But when day rises, night retreats, right? So when one gets stronger, the other one gets weaker, right? So they're kind of in a bit of an opposition there, mutual opposition. So like the introduction of sound, for example, destroys silence, right? Silence being yin, sound being yang, right? Like when one comes on the scene, the other one gets weaker. When one bows, the other rises. Right? So, right, because like if you're prostrate, right, like the subject, like it has to be serving someone, right? So there's the server and the served, right? So like everything we can look at in this like, duality way, this polarity. The mutual opposition. So like when the yang qi in the springtime, when the yang qi ascends in the spring, that's restricting the autumn coolness. So actually there's this concept that autumn coolness is still around. It's not just in the autumn, but they're in relation to each other. So like when the yang rises of the spring, the yin associated with the autumn retreats. Right. So in the autumn, when yin rises, yang retreats. Right. So like when there's more yin, that restricts the influence of the yang. So that's the mutual opposition. They oppose each other. And then number two, we look at mutual consumption, number one actually, which means that when we let consumption, so when we have more yin, that actually consumes the yang. Okay, so the increase of yang will lead to a decrease of yin. It's kind of like, it's pretty similar actually then to what we're talking about, but this is almost more like a qualitative property rather than quantitative. Like, right, like the mutual opposition is like when we have more yang, there's less yin. Like they're kind of like they move in sync with each other, but then they also consume each other. Like when we have too much yang, it actually consumes our yin. It causes the yin to lower. Kind of the same, but kind of different, mutual consumption. But this becomes more relevant with medicine when we talk about, if you're exposed to a lot of heat, it will actually consume your yin. So not like you're exposed to a lot of heat, that means that there's not as much cold in that moment, in that snapshot, but then also the consumption aspect that if you're exposed to a lot of yang or a lot of heat, that will consume your yin.
I'm sorry, you're so tired, I have to go to the sauna.
Yeah, so tired, because so yang, it becomes yin. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's also why, like, if you're like partying like crazy, you must become yin afterwards. That's mutual consumption, right? Yeah, so like if you think about like alcohol, people who drink alcohol, it's like so much yang qi that like, and then afterwards, everything restricts and contracts, headache, restriction, no energy. You want darkness, you want yin, because you just went so young that now you're so yin. You can't do anything. You like you can't move, right? Like extreme hangover, right? Because you're so young. And then you go so yin the next day.
The whole podcast that said something about your dopamine levels, if they go high, then they require to go extra low.
Exactly.
Baseline in order to even out.
Exactly. So like the same thing, or like, drug, that's like the rush with drugs, right? Oftentimes, I mean, so some people will seek out drugs, is another conversation, like drugs that are very young because they like that thrill of being young, right? Like stimulants, or things that increase dopamine or serotonin, right? On the one side of yang drugs, and then we have yin drugs like barbiturates, muscle relaxers, things that are more yin, that will bring you to more yin place, right?
So it's like, say like bipolar.
Bipolar, right? Manic depressive, right? Manic being too much, yang bipolar, right? So like, people who are so manic, they will eventually like consume their yin, even though it seems like they're so young, but they will crash. Actually, they will crash.
So this might be a conversation for later.
Yeah.
But, so the parasympathetic versus the
Yeah,
sympathetic.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So when the sympathetic, wait, which one's fight or flight?
Sympathetic is fight or flight.
Sympathetic. When that doesn't shut off.
Yes.
Then that's an excess of yang.
Yes, and then that will consume your yin so that you actually can't even go into parasympathetic.
Yeah.
So that's an example of mutual consumption, right? So first, mutual opposition, when you're in that state, you're so young, you don't have much yin by definition. But the mutual consumption, if you're always stimulating yourself, you actually deplete your yin. You can't even go to parasympathetic. Okay, so so that's that. But no, but worth highlighting. Okay, and then the next one, mutual interdependence. Number two, mutual interdependence. So this is basically that you, like I was saying earlier, you cannot have one without the other, right? Day implies night, night implies day. This is basically what two-ness means, interdependence. You can't really just have yang or just have yin. There's always a relationship. That's why we say, yin-yang, not yin and yang. It's yin-yang. And in Chinese, always like that. They always have these kind of like relationships. Chinese language is all about relationships. Like they don't even have different verb tenses or anything. It's just all relational, very relational language. So they have like, qi shui, like qi and blood, right, together, or like they have a lot of these kind of pairs in Chinese. So that's because it points to the interdependence aspect. Because if you try, you can't really have one without the other. If you kind of try to, you're going back to the oneness, one space. You know, if you have distinction, you always have to have both. So that's mutual interdependence. And then we have mutual transformation, the last one, which is kind of like we saw on the cycle. When it becomes so yang, it becomes yin. Yang transforms into yin, and yin transforms into yang. So like life transforms into death, death transforms into life, like out of nothing. Life comes forward, not nothing, but yin, yang comes. Just like in the ancient Chinese text, the Suen, written in the year 200. So it comments that extreme cold will bring about heat, and extreme heat will induce cold. So furthermore, they say excessive yin may cause yang syndromes, or they tend to be transformed into yang, and vice versa. So this is the mutual transformation part. So we can also see, this is getting a little like technical into the medicine side, but the mutual transformation of yin and yang often is seen during the development of a disease. For example, if a patient has a really high fever, which is suddenly lowered, this happens sometimes. You have a really high fever, but then all of a sudden the fever goes down, and now you have a pale complexion, cold limbs, very weak pulse. So this is where yang, when it goes so yang, it transforms into yin.
So I thought like the yin yang symbol is actually a dynamic.
It's dynamic, it's moving. So, and it's moving.
Still life, but it's
Right, exactly. But it's trying to imply that movement. Yeah, it's a cycle. Yep. So that's why, you know, it's important to, like, from a medical perspective, you look at the state that the patient is in. You know, you look at if they're in a very yin state, you know, you generally want to add in yang. You want to help that transformation happen. But then there's also strategies that utilize this mutual transformation property, that someone is so young, you actually add heat. That's not as common, but that is also an approach of, like, we're going to do moxibustion, what's called moxibustion, which is where we burn this herb mugwort on the skin. Is a yang activity, you know, adding heat, adding warmth. We actually want to add in more yang to make it into yin. That's another strategy, not as common, to push it over the edge, right? Or like someone has a high fever, it's like, okay, no, you want to actually encourage the fever, actually make that fever go so young that it goes into yin. So that, you know, and that's an important part of it as well.
So how do you know when you're gonna cool the fever? And
Yeah, it depends on the presentation. So, like, you know, in general, like, it depends. So like with a certain presentation in Chinese medicine, we generally always have a certain approach that we want to take to it. So like, for example, for an exterior condition, and we're going to get into this a little bit today, but for an exterior condition where you have you're fighting something, right? The immune system is fighting something. The disease is at the surface of the body. Generally, when we want to, the disease at the surface, we want to what's called release to the exterior. So basically, we promote sweating. We promote sweating for an exterior condition. Exterior condition means the body's fighting something actively. How do we know it's an exterior condition? When we feel the pulse, it's a floating pulse, because all the resources are mobilized to the surface of the body, they're fighting. So floating pulse. And then we also see the presence of fever and chills, simultaneous, what we say, simultaneous fever and chills, where we have the chills generally because it's a cold pathogen. It's a cold pathogen that comes in, but then the fever, because that's the body's yang qi mobilizing to the surface to fight it. So that's another example of this yin-yang interaction, where we have a cold pathogen, and then we have the yang rising to meet it, and they're fighting each other basically, and they're both present. So what we want to do, basically, we want to promote sweating, release event, actually encourage the body to mobilize the yang qi to the surface to make them sweat. And we have herbs that are diaphoretic herbs that promote sweating. Okay, and if it's a more heat pathogen, a more hot pathogen, we would use cool acrid herbs. Acrid is the flavor that promotes sweating, right? Spicy, kind of spicy herbs. There's spicy herbs, we say acrid. So if it's a wind heat at the surface, we want to use cool acrid herbs. If it's a wind cold at the surface, we want to use hot acrid herbs. But in both cases, we're venting the pathogen out through the skin, through the pores, through the sweat. You know, but then it gets a lot more nuanced, because maybe someone's already sweating, but they're still not having a resolution. We have a formula for that as well. So, but yeah.
Saying the obvious,
Mhm.
the body's way of fighting
Yes.
things is obviously a fever.
Exactly.
What you're saying.
Exactly. Yes, the body's way of fighting something is the fever, and that's the body's yang qi. That's a form of yang qi that we call wei qi, which is defensive qi. But that's a type of yang qi. So yeah, exactly. So then we can look at that even more and be like, okay, they never get fevers. they never get fevers. They have yang deficiency probably, because the fever is a sign of health, right? And so it's like we have an idea that whenever someone has a fever, you take Tylenol to lower the fever, but actually the fever is there for a reason. There are times when the fever can become pathological and we do actually need to clear heat. And that would be a different strategy. We will look at the presentation and we would do different strategy based on that. So if, you know, but yeah, generally it's an exterior condition, floating pulse, fever and chills, aversion to wind, aversion to cold, body aches. There's a whole, you know, all these symptoms, then we would want to release the exterior, promote sweating.
In contrast to an interior.
If it's an interior condition, exactly. So if it's, it depends, it can get complicated. So if it's an interior cold, we want to warm yang, warm and expel and dispel cold. It kind of depends on where it is. For example, if you have cold in the channels, like arthritis, cold in the channels, pain that's worse with cold. We have this cold that's in the channels, in the, you know, then we want to warm the channels and drive out cold. Actually, with the herbal strategy, we still would release the exterior because we want to, the channels are actually considered exterior as opposed to interior, which is the organ level. So we can think about, again, more yin is organ level, yang level is the channels, the meridians. That's actually more yang in relation to the organs, right? The organs are like the roots and the channels are the branch. So we can use the branch to treat the roots. That's what we do in acupuncture. We're treating the channels to affect the organs, or we're using the channels to affect the channels only. Maybe it's just a channel problem, right? Like you have pain in this channel, no internal condition, you're actually fine internally, but then we actually need to just treat the channels and remove the obstruction and whatever we want to do there. And some would say that, again, we're just thinking about all these polarities, that herbal medicine would be more suited for internal conditions and acupuncture is more suited for external conditions. However, both can do both, but that is more of an affinity. Like for more pain conditions, channel things, acupuncture works so well. For more internal things, herbs works really well, but herbs actually works well for everything. I'm kind of partial to herbal medicine, but you know, it kind of depends on your preference. But
Do you prescribe herbs as teas or in capsules or what?
both, I guess, for a short. So like raw herbs where you do a decoction, or we can do powders, or we can do capsules, which are encapsulated powder. So it depends. That's, yeah, we'll get more into that when we look at herbal medicine specifically. What's that?
As teas very often.
That's ideal. That's kind of like that's the more traditional way. But a lot of people don't want to cook them. So my teacher in Taiwan would actually cook them in a pressure cooker in his clinic and then package them into plastic vacuum sealed packs, the actual cooked decoction. But that's a ton of effort, really difficult to do. It becomes like time prohibitive and cost prohibitive. But yeah, interesting question. Okay, but let's get back on track. I think we basically covered all of these things. So that's that. So we covered that. We covered the Taiji symbol. I do just want to go back a second to just comment on this kind of funny thing. So like the cycles of life, because we looked at this thing as like in the context of a year. We looked at it in the context of a day. We can also look at it in the context of like a human life, right? So like we have this will be birth, right, from yin into the first signs of yang, right? Life emerging, right? And then what would this be? The opposite. This would be when there's the maximum yang that's becoming yin in the context of someone's life. What would that be? Kind of, well, yeah, it kind of depends on who you ask and depends on what you're talking about. It depends on how long you live, right? By definition. But like this is the part where you reach kind of full maturation and things start to decline. Of course, there's like, in a way, there's decline already happening here in some sense. You know, and there's some kind of growth happening here as well. Like it, you know, it's not so like compartmentalized, right? Because we still have new cells growing as we're all, you know, there's still growth. So we don't want to think about it like, oh my gosh, like I'm dying here. Like we're always dying in a sense, but we're also always living and having more life.
I look at more like the physical is starting to deteriorate a little
Yes.
bit, but your wisdom is
Yes,
growing, hopefully.
exactly. So there's this concept in Chinese medicine that as we lose our, as we lose our jing, our essence, as we go through the cycle of life, that essence is transformed into wisdom, right? So, but anyway, so yeah, this would be where things start to decline. So it kind of depends on you know, who you ask, but you know, this in the ancient Chinese text, this would be like around like 35 or something like that, like 30, 35. What? So yeah, so 35. Well, so they say in the classics, in the Neijing Suwen, written in the year 200, right? So this is a dialogue between the Yellow Emperor Huangdi and his physician Chibo. That's the book. It's this emperor asking his doctor, so what's up with this? You know, can you explain this? And then the doctor answers this. So the very first question, very first chapter, he says, okay, so back in the olden days, people used to live to be 100 years old. Now people are dying at like 40. They're dropping like flies at like 40 and 50. What's going on here? Okay, so this is the year 200, and he's saying back in the day, people were living to be 100. Now they're not. So it's kind of funny to think about it like that. And so his answer, Chibo's answer, the physician says, well, I probably should go a little bit more on the screen for the people online. You know, well, back in the ancient days, people respected the laws of yin-yang. They respected the cycles of nature. Nowadays, people are fond of the drink. They have sex too much. They like, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll, basically, like of the 200s in 200. And he's saying like people are just not, you know, respecting nature like they were back in the day. If you respect nature, if you live within the cycles of nature, you will live to be 100. And then you will ride into heaven on the back of a dragon. That's the immortality, right? So that's in Taoism. In Taoism, there's this concept of immortality, but it doesn't really mean to live forever. It kind of means to like transform into pure spirit when it's your time to live out complete life, like, right, like reaching the full completion of that. Like, of course, that varies from person to person, right? But yeah. So in the context of human life, this would be, you know, could be like in the aging, it's pretty brutal, especially to women. It's like, okay, because it has the cycles of 7 and 8. So women age in cycles of 7. You know, so like at the age of 14, the woman has the first menstruation, right? It's like not everyone, but it's the general guideline. And then, but as you get to like 28, even it's like things are starting to decline already, you know, and it's like, it's pretty brutal. You know, if you read it, you feel maybe personally attacked. And then it's like, you know, wrinkles start to form and things start to dry out and all of this. But
42 or 49 instead of.
Well, so as we get into here, so okay, so think about the autumn equinox, the autumn of your life. So for me, menopause is here. Menopause is here. So because menopause is when this is another rite of passage, right? So it's like birth, we have puberty, right? And then we have this kind of like not even midlife, because midlife can be more, you know, people live to be a long time now. This could be more midlife actually, but that's when things are starting to really decline. You know, that sounds brutal, but like, you know, in that sense, right? The yin influences become more prevalent. And so we naturally want to kind of like fight that because we don't like that process. We love the yang. We live in a very yang culture. We celebrate being active, being virile, like being, you know, like intense, you know, like that's good, right? So what do we do instead of, you know, instead of going with this, we actually get more yang a lot of times, menopausal syndrome, and we have like too much yang. You know, and so that's like a rebellion of the cycle of nature, where we should actually become more yin as we go into that time of life. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just like life. It's like the autumn time of our life. So this is where menopausal, and then you know and obviously we can like extend any of these times, right? Like you know, if we live a really good life in line with the seasons, and we have very clear emotional life, right? Because you know, all of these cycles of life also show up in terms of moving through emotions as well. So we'll look at that more when we look at the 5 elements. But if we move fluidly through life, we will extend our life. When we get stuck in certain parts of the cycle, right, the yin yang cycle, if we get stuck in these parts, that's not promoting life. And so then we will age more quickly, you know, when we have more stagnation or more depletion. So you know, we find our balance. Anyway, so I just wanted to look at that in terms of the cycle of the human life. Any questions at this point?
Once again, like straight out, you're saying puberty, menopause, birth and death.
Midlife.
It seems like it'd be like reproduction, like.
You've kind of reached your, yeah, I mean, but it's more like full maturation. So like the noon of someone's life, like the summer solstice, I believe it's like 33, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Sometimes they say like that's your perfect, like, you know,
right,
your heavenly body is at
right,
33 is the perfect age or something.
Yeah, so this is kind of like, you know, this is, well, really, this is the fertile window for women. Like this is kind of the fertile window, right? From your first, technically, like in terms of your life cycle, you know, from your first menstruation to your last menstruation here, right? And the optimal time would be in the middle of that.
Got it. Well, for girls, but like you're not.
Yeah.
For guys.
But we also, same, I mean, just different cycle, but, we also have like the first ejaculation. And then, here is where, you can still ejaculate some and don't really ejaculate so much or very little, but it's declining. It's declining here, both in quantity and quality. Okay. Any questions online? Let's see. Someone said earlier, I wonder if burnout is an example of this when we were talking about, people doing so much and then they burn out. Yeah, exactly. Burnout. That implies like burnout. You're like too much yang that you're burnt. And then you're, burnt to a crisp, and then you have to just like rest and cool yourself off, etc. So yeah, burnout or adrenal fatigue, right? Like you use up all your adrenaline and then you just have no more. Okay. Okay, so it looks like now we can actually look at some herbs and formulas, and then we'll just kind of like any questions that are lingering. See if there's anything else I want to cover here. That's good. Yeah, we like questions. So, well, since we're talking about like menopause, menopause is this natural kind of the yin influence is increasing, right? So we can look at that kind of integrating with what we're talking about of like how do we live in line with the seasons, the cycles of life, so in order to help alleviate that transition, we want to like be more yin in general. So more yin practices, like what are yin practices? Can anyone think of like lifestyle practices that would be more yin, that would help nourish the yin? Because in menopause, a lot of times, if you have menopausal syndrome, you have all this excess heat. Okay, so how do you actually
Like walking instead of running?
Walking instead of running? Yeah. Well, yoga can go either way because yoga sometimes is very active. So what kind of yoga would be more yin yoga, right? Like holding postures for a long time, right? More stillness, more internal time. A lot of times yoga is more yang, usually, right? There's only like yin yoga class. That's just like one class of 8. And then, all other forms like hatha yoga or, Ashtanga, Kundalini, they're all more yang, basically. Well, we need both. We do need both. Yeah, no, it is good to have both. It does keep us young, but it also, if we're so on that side, it will actually deplete our yin and our yang because we're using it all up. So it really is like the balance, and you can look at you individually. Are you more like yang deficient? Then maybe do more yang yoga and do like hot yoga. But most people shouldn't be doing, that's extreme, but like a lot of people shouldn't be doing hot yoga because they're already too young. A lot of people who go to hot yoga are so intense and so like they love it. They should be doing yin yoga probably to counterbalance themselves, unless their idea is to go into the so young that they become yin, but that's not usually the idea there for them. Right.
I haven't gone to
Yeah. 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 So for yeah. Yeah. So for some people, it feels so unnatural to do, hot yoga because it's like, I'm already hot and now I'm going to go and get more hot. Right. So, so we kind of naturally can find our own balance, but then we get stuck in like, oh, this is good for me, because like, we don't think about things in terms of the two-ness or like what's good for, am I more yang? Do I need more of this? We don't have the concept of that. We're just like, oh, this thing is good. I'll do this then. Oh, cold plunges are good. Oh my gosh, I'm going to just jump in cold water all the time. That's from my perspective, that's very dangerous, right? Except like, good for people who have such yang constitutions that they can transform that yang into yin very quickly, right? So it's like, oh, now all these benefits of cold plunging because it helps to regulate blood pressure. It helps to, promote calm, all this stuff because people are too young and it makes you more yin. But if you're already, more yin and you go into cold plunges, that's not so good. You actually need more heat therapy or cold showers, right? There is this concept I will say, on this, because I think it's important that like when we do like go into a sauna, for example, or hot yoga, what happens is that we bring all our chi, our yang chi up to the surface, right? Just like I was saying, if you're, you have something on the exterior of the body or all this heat, all the, heat rises, right? All the yang chi is going to come to the surface. You're sweating. And then so all this chi is coming out. The yang chi is kind of leaking out when the pores are open. That both the yang and the yin are leaking because the yang chi, the heat is leaving the body, as well as the yin fluids, the sweat is leaving the body. So what you want to do, if you have a strong constitution at least, is if you go in a sauna, you want to actually go after that into cold just for a second, not for long, but just to actually close the pores. So you bring all that yang to the surface, but then you lock it in. You don't keep losing it and leaking it out. So that's an important thing, and that's like really common across many cultures, that they like after a sauna they go in cold or something like that. However, if you're more a weak constitution, you need to be careful about that, because if your pores are open and then you go into cold, that cold can go and invade your body, and then you can have a problem potentially. So it's like it's hard to even give advice one way or the other, because it depends on the person. But just something to be mindful of, like if you love to go in the sauna and you're like, oh, it feels so good to sweat, but you're actually like leaking out a lot of vital, qi and yin by sweating so much. So you need to kind of keep it in balance. It's nice to kind of bring the yang to the surface and then kind of like lock it in. Right. So that kind of similarly, like in terms of, sexual activity, like from a Taoist perspective, you like bring all this, essence to the surface, the yang qi, and then you lock it in so it circulates through the body rather than leaking out.
So with a hot, I always take a hot shower and then
A little
straight
cold.
it.
I think that's good. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, so now we'll look at representative herbs and formulas. It's not an herbs class or a formulas class, but I think it's cool to think about.
Or you could do the hot tub and you get everything there.
Yeah, that happens naturally. Yeah. We were talking about, you asked about how come in Chinese, you said your daughter does a.
No, just someone I met.
Okay, someone else said her daughter is doing a Chinese immersion. Okay.
My daughter too. Her daughter
Okay.
and my daughter.
Okay, Chinese immersion, but it wasn't actually from that. It was just that you're saying someone said the number 4 is like not lucky. It's considered in Chinese, the number 4 is considered unlucky, because in Chinese, this is the character for 4. The way we say 4 is s. Chinese has a lot of what are called homonyms. So like if you say it in a different way, different tone, it's a tonal language. So s, if we say s, third tone, I believe, that's death. So like the number 4 is considered unlucky because of the association with death, because if you say it slightly differently, it implies death. So anyway, that's just a little aside. So like in China, if you go to a bank, it's like the bank tellers number 1, 2, 3, 5, they'll skip 4.
Oh, weird.
And even in buildings, sometimes your elevator will skip the floor 4. There'll be no 4th floor. So you're in the elevator and you're like, there's no 4th floor. Not always, like, they're like adapting to times, but you'll still see that. Ironically, because it was like, but 8 is so lucky, but 4 is unlucky. And like 8 is double 4.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can look at these representative herbs. So for yin, and these are representative herbs for nourishing yin and representative herbs for tonifying yang. So I'm just going to look at one herb for each. So for yin, the kind of classical, most stereotypical yin herb is called the shu di huang, which in English is called Romania roots. Okay, so in Chinese medicine, Romania goes to the kidneys, goes to the liver, and goes to the heart.
And this is if you're trying to increase the yin.
Yes, exactly. So we would use this herb for yin deficiency primarily, and we'll look at it in more detail in a second. But I'll just say the names of the herbs for reference up here first. So
And
for
is
yang,
it easy to find these herbs?
well, yes, but you don't want to use it necessarily unless you know for sure you need it. And generally in Chinese medicine, we never administer herbs. I'm always off to this side for some reason. We almost never use single herbs. We always use herbs in formulas. So because they interact with each other and they're synergistic and they can comprehensively actually address a condition and a whole mechanism of action and in a very sophisticated way, and use formulas that have been used for thousands of years in particular ways. So usually we use herbs in formulas, sometimes single herbs, but not so commonly. And so then representative yang herb, I have to go on this side, it just feels right. I would think if I'm right-handed, I would be on the left side, but anyway, so yang would be this herb called fuzi. Not so common in Western herbal medicine, very popular in China, which is aconite. It's called aconite. Amazing herb. Such an amazing herb. Both of them are amazing. But there's actually like these herbs are so so powerful, like so representative, so symbolic in a way in Chinese medicine that they're very popular herbs, very famous herbs, because this is like the representative, actually the representative kidney yin herb. This is the representative kidney yang herb. So the kidney is actually considered the source of all yin yang, all yin and yang. So the like the primordial yin, the primordial yang, the kidneys. We're not going to get so in detail into Chinese medical physiology, but we'll just say that the kidney function. We'll get into a little bit of what the kidney function means exactly. But this is represented kidney yin or kidney yang herb, because kidney yin is like the root of all. The kidney yin yang is the root of all yin yang in the body, in some sense. So this is doesn't just act on the kidneys. This doesn't just act on the kidneys. But when we talk about kidney yin, we think about this herb. When we talk about kidney yang, we think about this herb. When we think about yin, though, in general, we think about this herb. When we think about yang in general, we think about this herb. So let's look a little more detail into these two herbs. Herbs are, yeah, I mean, so the ones that I get, I use a company called Spring Winds Herbs, which is really, really good in terms of quality, the best quality herbs available in the West. And, you know, I think in the whole world, like quality becomes a really big concern with anything, with food, with herbs. But it's a complicated discussion because there's one piece of it that overall, you know, one, we can think about pesticides, right? And wanting to have more clean food, clean herbs, because, you know, pesticides are on the rise and used a lot, and we don't necessarily want the pesticides with herbs, we want the pure herbs. But then another thing is the, you know, soil quality, you know, the soil quality now versus, you know, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. The modern agricultural practices deplete the minerals and the nutrients in the soil, right? So like if we have the same herb nowadays, one, it might be like more afraid of contaminants, like on the one in the purity side, and then on the other side is that it's probably weaker than it was 2,000 years ago. Just like food, if you compare, you know, a strawberry now to a strawberry, you know, 1,000 years ago, it's going to be the nutrient concentration is going to be a lot less. So that's consideration as well in terms of dosing, that we kind of want to increase the dosing.
So I have a question about local
Mhm.
in your area.
Mhm.
So these are all Chinese
Mhm.
foods. What would be the Western equivalent? There's got to
Yeah.
be something that's very similar to that.
Yeah, yes and no. Yes and no. So like there's certain herbs that are more irreplaceable than others. So certain herbs that really there's nothing, like we haven't found anything that will do, like some herbs will do some of the things, you know, so they could be a replacement in some ways, but not all of the things. So it's like, and even herbs, the same herb grown in a different region or a different area will actually have a different, you know, spectrum of actions. So even the same herb in a different place will have different actions. And then so, you know, but it's great. So that's like something that's happening a bit in Chinese medicine because like all these herbs grow in China. That's where they're from. Some of them are very region specific and they won't grow the same elsewhere. So, you know, but then there are other herbs like mint, right? Like we use mint, like mint grows everywhere. Like it might be a little bit different, but it's mint, like it's the same. And then other herbs that are much more geographically specific. So it's like an important topic of conversation and thing to, you know, consider, because ideally, you know, you want to, so like from a Chinese medicine perspective, we would look at those local herbs, but then we would look at it through the Chinese medicine lens. Like what is it doing physiologically from a Chinese medicine perspective? Because Chinese herbal medicine is very different than Western herbal medicine in terms of how it conceptualizes these things, right? Like we're talking about nourishing kidney yin, we're talking about, you know, these organs, which don't mean exactly the same thing as the Western organs because they're the organ network. So it's a bit different. And we can also, we have different lenses even within Chinese medicine. We have like this herb that, you know, treats Taiyang disease. We don't know what the heck Taiyang disease is from the Western side. So that's one thing that's a little bit tricky when we're comparing the two, is that, you know, we can't do it now.
Okay. So you said the yin kidney, it's nourishing. That's a nourishing herb. Is it nourishing the yang too?
No, not so much.
Is it tonifying?
No, not so much tonifying yang. I mean, in the sense that it's nourishing the kidney yin, and because these things are related to each other, right? If we're nourishing the yin, that can transform into yang in that sense. But it really is like, there are some herbs, though, on the other hand, that tonify kidney yin and yang at the same time. They're like kind of equal, like they do both. But they maybe don't do as strongly.
Aconite is not a nourishing.
Not a nourishing yin. It's a tonifying yang.
Tonifying.
Okay, so let's look a little more detail. So like Shuji Huang, this herb Romania, first of all, is like very dense, very thick, really heavy, very yin. If we think about these associations, it's black also. It's and this is the prepared Romania. Shu Di Huang is the prepared Romania. It's prepared commonly by steaming in black beans, black bean juice. Black beans, black, very yin, very kidney. Kidney has association with black, water element. So this is prepared Romania. There's a raw Romania, which has slightly different properties, but this is the prepared Romania. So it's very thick, very sticky. So what that does, we can just think first on like a kind of spiritual level. When we're taking something that's so yin, it's almost like laying in the ocean in the middle of the night. Like that's what it does within ourselves, you know, to give us that ultimate yin capacity. Also nourishes the blood, but nourishes like a deep level of the blood, the kidney blood, which is like the bone marrow. Like this is like very deep, you know, kind of like the formation of blood. So when we have a formula for nourishing blood, for example, we have a little time to mention this, but we'll come back in a second. But if we just look at this like little bonus formula, if we look at this formula called suwutang, this is an herbal formula, suwutang, which is the 4-substance decoction, 4 substances. We have, this is the representative formula for building blood, nourishing blood. So we have Shu Di Huang, sometimes we just say Shu Di Romania, which we just said. That's nourishing like the kind of bone marrow yin aspect of blood, the yin aspect of blood. And then we have this herb Bai Shao, which is white peony roots. Bai Shao, white peony roots. And then this Bai Shao is also nourishing the blood, but nourishes more liver blood. And it courses the blood, kind of helps it to move. And astringent, it's sour in flavor. Okay, and then we have Dangui, which some people may have heard of, kind of popular. It's gotten kind of typecast as like a gynecological herb. It's like it does more than that, but it's kind of typecast as a gynecology herb. Of course, we never use just that herb in Chinese medicine, but it is important in gynecology. So Dangui, which is more strongly, it's like almost like equal parts nourishing and moving, right? It moves the blood as well. And then we have Chuanxiang, Gusticum. Chuanxiang, which is really more strongly moving. This is like the yang within, this is the more yang aspect. So we're kind of, as we go down, we become more yang. So it's like the most yin of the herb. Sometimes we have like represent yin like that and yang like that. So within the blood aspect, when we're talking about blood, this is the yin part of blood, and as we're going to more yang. So anyway, we're nourishing the blood while we're moving the blood, because one problem with nourishing strategy in general, tonifying strategy, and you guys, this is like kind of detailed Chinese medicine art like that we're getting into here. But one problem with doing nourishing strategy in general is we're scared of creating stagnation, because when we're just building, if it's not moving, we can actually create more problems. Just like if you say, oh, I'm not going to lose my essence, I'm going to store it, you actually can be creating stagnation. So whenever we're doing a tonifying strategy, especially nourishing yin, because yin is creating more moisture, creating more substance, we're a little bit cautious to do that, especially if their yang is deficient. Because if their yang cannot transform that dampness, you can get dampness. That dampness can cause stagnation. So a lot of people, especially people who are more into the yang side of things, and we'll get into it, there's actually like, there's whole schools that are like formed on, there's like this, you know, almost like Romania school of thinking, and there's like a Futsa school of thinking. We'll get into that in a second. We have a little bit left, but we'll do a little bit of that. Anyway, so this is Suwutang. This is just demonstrating a little bit of how, and it gets a lot more complex if we look at the different organ dynamics and everything. But just to give you an idea of a very basic formula strategy, we would almost never just use Suwutang on its own either. Anyway, but that's just like a kind of teaching formula for nourishing blood, that we always want to have the yang aspect within as well, not just the yin aspect. So we almost never, I wouldn't even recommend anyone to just take Shu Di Huang, because it's actually too yin, it's too cloying. Rarely would someone benefit from just having Shu Di Huang, but in the context of a formula, it could be very helpful if it's applicable. But some people, even if it's in a formula, it can create some stagnation, or actually can generate, even though it's so yin, because that yin creates dampness, that dampness creates friction, that friction creates heat. Anyway, so that can become a problem with doing tonifying strategies in general. And most people often we have a culture of more excess problems, more than we have deficiency problems. In general, in our culture, we have more excess, you know, our diet is more excess. So we usually want to have more draining strategy, or more reducing strategy, where we're wanting to clear excess right? Like transform dampness, right? Think about obesity or something like that. Like if someone's obese, that's kind of excess yin in a way, too much dampness. Too much dampness. So we want to transform that excess and maybe add some yang to help transform that. Anyway, and help the body to transform and absorb that. So we always want to be careful when we're too much on one side or the other. If we're doing too much yang strategy, we want to make sure that we're not damaging their yin.
Well, the goal is balance.
The goal is balance, but if someone is on one side, we do need to kind of do an unbalanced strategy to get them back to balance in a way. Because if we just gave them this perfectly harmonious formula, it's not really dynamic enough to get them where they need to go, right? Unless you're just taking it for more like preventative or something. So we want to use unbalanced strategies in a way to get them to balance, right? Like, especially if someone's in a really severe on one side or the other. But things get a lot more complicated when we look at other substances. Yin and yang are just two substances of the body. We also have blood, we have fluids, we have essence, jing, from a substances perspective. But anyway, yeah, Shu Di Huang, that's just basic heart, liver, kidney herb. And then we have Futsa aconite, which is this herb that revives devastated yang, really strongly mobilizes their deep yang of the body.
So is that like trauma?
Potentially. This is like could be used in severe depression. Someone's like very, very yin and yang deficient. We would want to look clinically at like what's their presentation like, what are their symptoms. We can think about the pulse. So with the pulse, when we feel the pulse, we feel the qualities of the pulse, right? If someone has yin deficiency, any guesses on what the pulse would be like? Faint, possibly. Less dynamic if there's yin deficiency. So think about yin deficiency with many different pulse qualities. But in general, warmer, but how does that show up on the pulse? So yin deficient pulse, because yin is anchoring, yin is more interior. So if we don't have the yin anchoring, the pulse actually can be floating. It can be floating at the surface, which we said before, if there's an exterior invasion, all the qi can be at the surface. That can be the case too. But if someone is in a state of yin deficiency, their yang can be kind of like all the way leaking at the surface. That's one way. It could be floating. It could be thin as well, like you said, kind of frail, because they don't have the fluids and blood so much. So the pulse can actually become more thin, and it can also become more rapid. Rapid is a sign of heat. So because the yin is more deficient, the yang will be relatively more excessive. So it's a more yang pulse. Gosh, so many places we can go with this. I do want to just say this one thing about this, which is that this kind of helps to answer this. So if we have yin deficiency, so let's say this is like, this line represents the ideal balance of yin yang. Let's say if your yin yang is like both and equal, you have a lot of both, like bar graph, right? You can have like a bar graph, right? So like this is like the ideal state. Your yin and yang is in perfect harmony. Of course, it was always dynamic, right? But this is just an ideal state. And then let's say if we have a yin deficiency, so yin deficiency in Chinese we say shu. So yin deficiency. So let's say this is yin, this is yang. So let's say this is yin and this is yang. So if this is the ideal, let's say our yang is fine, but then the yin is only here. This person it will look like they have too much yang. They actually don't have too much yang, but relatively. So this is what we will call in Chinese medicine, this would be called empty heat. This is like kind of like common with menopause, we can say, right? Like they look like they have so much yang, but it's really because their yin is deficient. Often it's more complicated than that, but that's a yin deficiency. And so what would be the treatment strategy here? The strategy, what we want to do?
Feed the yin.
Exactly. So this is the diagnosis, right? And then the treatment, we will want to tonify the yin, nourish yin. That's the strategy in a very simple sense. So then if we have a yang deficiency, right? So let's say the yang is only here and the yin is here. What's the strategy? It's like very simple when we look at it like this. We want to, the diagnosis, this is what we would call empty cold. and we want to treatment strategies. We want to tonify yang.
And then you can do the whole thing with it being above the baseline.
Exactly. So that's where we're going. That's where we'll go next, where we have the.
Balance, so that you can get.
So let's say, yeah, because it's possible, you know, instead of perfect balance, let's say you have, this is yin, this is yang, and let's say we have actually too much yin, and let's say our yang is like normal. This actually wouldn't last for that long. Why? Because remember, mutual consumption. If you have too much yin, that will actually harm the yang. So that will eventually go to where we have, right, like too much yin and even way too much yang, too little yang over time.
So greater imbalance.
Greater imbalance. So things can get worse as you keep going in that direction. But anyway, you know, what in this case, we want to actually expel the excess yin pathogen, which could be cold, it could be damp, right? So we would either want to expel cold, which we can do in different ways, or we want to do something about the damp. We can either transform the dampness to have our body absorb it, or we can either drain the dampness through urination, or those are the main ways.
How do you drain dampness through urination? You just drink more water?
No, they wouldn't do it. That could actually create more dampness potentially if your body's already not transforming. Yeah, so we use bland herbs or bitter herbs. There's different ways to do it, but we use draining herbs that promote urination, diuretic herbs. And so there are some herbs that simultaneously drain and transform damp, like Fuling Poria mushroom. But anyway, it depends on like where the dampness is. Like if the dampness is in the bladder, we usually just want to drain it because it's already there. Like just drain it out. Generally, maybe a little bit absorbing as well. But versus if the dampness is more in the digestion, we usually want to use more transforming strategy. Use the digestion to actually transform that dampness into healthy yin.
How do you know it's,
yeah.
How do you know it's damp in the bladder unless you have psychic powers?
There's diagnostic skills. So look at the pulse, the tongue, and the symptoms. So so if there's dampness in the bladder, there would probably be inhibited urination because the dampness is obstructing the urination. So you can have stop and start urination or urinary hesitancy or feeling of incompletion after urinating. Those would all be signs of damp obstructing in the bladder. That's very important. We want to treat that.
Every hour urination all the time.
That could even be dampness too, because it's not being transformed. And so you feel like you keep needing to pee, or that could be yang deficiency where the yang is not holding it up because yang qi goes up, right? The yang qi is not holding up. And so you have to keep going. So that could be yang deficiency, or it could be excess dampness, or a combination of both. Kind of depends on the symptoms. We have to kind of look at it. But yeah, it could be kidney yang deficiency, which you might use this herb futsa, or it could be other things where you want to transform the dampness. It really depends. Like in the example of, like, think of a man who has an enlarged prostate, and that's like obstructing the, you know, and they keep needing to pee. That's excess dampness. There's actually like this fluid filling up, excess dampness. And so they're like, oh, it's because my prostate is enlarged. That's why it's damp. No, actually the prostate is enlarged because there's dampness. So we actually, if we can drain the dampness and transform the dampness, the prostate will get back to normal size, actually. So yeah, inhibited urination is a big one. I love it because it's so easy to treat. Just take these herbs that drain the dampness. It's like, that's an easy one. Anyway, so that's that. We're actually out of time technically. But so I'll just kind of stop there, even though there's a few threads that are not quite complete. And then I'll just kind of let you guys guide if you have any more questions based on this stuff. We didn't get to formulas, but we did get to these representative herbs.
In an appointment with you, what would that look like diagnostically?
So we just like look at the tongue and pulse and look at the symptoms and look at your chief complaint and then develop a strategy, treatment strategy. So I will just look at your tongue and pulse and look at your constitution, look at how you present. You know, ideally we want to treat. Yeah, so we'll look at, there's, you know, a lot. I can't do a whole diagnosis, but we can do that potentially in the future. But yeah. So like there are different ways. So like from a 5-element perspective, if we want to use that lens, because there's many different lenses even within Chinese medicine, from a 5-element perspective, we would want to diagnose, okay, what element is kind of like out of balance, or what element is your constitution. And so then we can treat the constitution. So when you're healthy, we can actually treat the constitution. We can go at a deeper level of, basically just doing deeper work rather than pathology. Usually people come in when their disease is already progressed, so we want to treat the disease. But when there's no disease, and I'm using the disease loosely, not saying liver disease, just out of balance, right? Some kind of disease. If there's not disease, we want to treat the constitution. So if one of the texts that I want to look at in the future is this book of herbs called the Shenong's Bansao, the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica, that looks at these different grades of herbs. And the inferior grade of herbs treats disease and they're toxic. And then the middle grade of herbs treats the constitution. And then the higher grade of herbs just treats basically helps to improve life. Like these herbs help you to become immortal. They say they love immortality, right? The Taoists. But anyway, they're those superior herbs. If you're like really healthy, you can actually use these superior grade herbs to enhance life, to kind of like evolve your consciousness in a way. You can look at it like that. But yeah, you can look at it like that. And then, so versus if someone's in a disease state, you wouldn't really use those. Well, that's a whole conversation, because there's, maybe you could, that's getting very popular now, is like the, using, psychedelic assisted therapy, as it's called, right? But yeah, so sometimes, by the way, we want to use toxic herbs sometimes, actually. Like in Chinese medicine, futsa is actually toxic. Futsa is actually toxic, but we do things to mitigate the toxicity. Basically prepare it. And so if we do raw futsa, it's toxic. Like if you eat it, it will make your tongue really numb. If you eat a high enough dose, it's fatal. But when we process it, like toxic is not actually bad. In Chinese medicine perspective, toxic just means like very powerful. Partially it means very powerful. So this is a toxic, this is hot, acrid, and toxic, and it's prepared to lessen the toxicity, and then it's used in balanced in formulas, right? So like sometimes we want toxic strategy, right? Like chemotherapy is toxic for a reason, because it's killing things, killing the cancer, as well as killing regular cells as well. We need to deal with that. But yeah, there are treatment strategies that are using toxic medicinals in order to achieve effect, usually to treat active disease. Like you wouldn't want to usually use toxic herbs if you're healthy. Why would you? But if you're diseased, you might want to use these really powerful toxic herbs in certain circumstances.
And if you're treating the constitution, then that's just increasing the quality of life, right?
Yeah, if you're treating the constitution, you're like, okay, you're a fire person. That means that's the kind of like your greatest strength, but that's also where you get stuck. So I'll use this like representative fire, element formula to kind of help you bring out your true nature even more like readily and more fluidly, so that you can, or you're like so much fire that you actually want to reduce the fire. You want to like use a cooling the fire strategy. It kind of depends on how it's showing up for you. So like if you're, let's say you're earth element type, but you're like excessive earth, we want to maybe like move that excessive earth versus tonify. So again, is it more excess or deficiency? How do you know? Pulse, again, pulse or tongue. There's excessive pulses or deficient pulses, and then also symptoms as well. Okay,
Are
so
you able to just look at each one of us in like a few seconds and
yes
say
and no.
what element?
I mean, just like, I can look at like, I know I can look at someone if they have like a really red face. That's probably, there's maybe a heat condition, this rising yang, that could be from excess heat, or that could be from deficient heat. If someone like look at someone and they have a pale face, that's more deficiency or more cold. Could be a full cold, it could be deficient cold.
Is it easy for you to just look at somebody and see what constitution they are?
In certain ways, it can be complicated, because there is like a representative wood type constitution, what they look like physically. But that's not the only thing that we use. We also, to diagnose 5 element, which we'll get more into in the 5 element part of the series, we'll look at like the color of the face, the sound of the voice. Like wood is more like of a shout, like very precise, like that. That's a wood type person, versus an earth type person who's singing like like this kind of like earth element, that's like sing type voice. So we look at the color, sound, odor. We actually can look at the odor, not like so much the body odor, but like the smell on the skin, like on the back of the neck. I don't really do that. I mean, I do it, but I don't like do it. Like, can I smell you? I do smell them, but not like actively. Sometimes it's against my will, really. It can be extreme, but that, strong odor can indicate, an imbalance. But this is not so much a strong odor. It's actually more subtle, especially if the person's healthy. But if a person is healthy, even if they're mostly healthy, there will be a very slight rancid quality of the wood associated with a rancid, or like almost like oil, kind of like rancid oil, versus earth type person would have more fragrant skin. It can be tough because people wear a lot of lotions and hairspray and shampoo and oils and all these kind of things. The smell can be tough. And then emotion, and so color. So in diagnosing from 5-element perspective, we look at what's called the CSOE, which is color, sound, odor, emotion. Emotion is the other one. So kind of like, what's the predominant emotion? Obviously people go through all of them, but where do people get stuck? Where's the predominant emotion? Like wood would be associated with anger or frustration, like stuck, like this rising energy that's not able to express itself, versus the earth energy, which is like about processing, digesting. That one can get stuck in like rumination or like circular thinking, right? So that's earth. Earth is called like sympathy, or like, actually it's translated as sympathy, like overly sympathetic, overly thoughtful. You're like too much, too much in that kind of like sticky circular kind of thing, processing. That's earth, out of balance emotionally. So anyway, that's one way. Like I could talk to someone for a little while, and based on the sound of their voice, color of their face, odor, and the emotion, we can do a diagnosis that way. That's like traditional 5-element acupuncture. That's how we do that. By the way, if people need to leave, please leave. You won't be offending me or anything, because it's 9 after. I don't have a clinic in Utah yet. I just moved here last week. But yeah, I just sold my clinic in Boise, Idaho. So yeah, I'm looking for space right now, which is like a little bit
Are you still taking
tricky.
clients?
I think I'm going to start taking clients at Stephanie's treatment room. Yeah, which is a good segue, that like, if anyone wants to maybe have access to the recording, because all this was recorded as well. Let me make sure it was recorded. Yes, it was recorded. Yeah, so if anyone wants to have maybe access later to the recording, or also if you want to like just kind of stay in touch, or like find out about updates about Chinese medicine or anything, we'll maybe hand around a piece of paper. I don't know if you have anything like a notebook, or I can grab one for people's email addresses. Oh, people said online when we were talking about yin activities, prayer, right? Like something is very yin. Prayer is a little bit active, because you're actually putting out, you're putting out this mental energy, versus like meditation would be more yin, right? Like you like actually just stillness, meditation, and then the thoughts arise. The yang naturally comes, but then you come back to the yin, prayer is kind of combination of yin and yang, really. And then yoga nidra, right? Exactly, yoga nidra with meditation. Knitting is kind of both, like it's active, but it's also relaxing.
Compared to 5.
Exactly, totally. Yeah, deep stretches.
What does water sound like?
Groan. So someone who like talks like this, it's very like unidirectional, kind of monotone, has like a power to it, might take unexpected stops, and that's kind of like a groan, like that. Yeah.
So I just created a paper.
Oh, perfect.
Name and email.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then actually you can send it around that way. Do we have a clip? Oh, we have a clipboard. Okay.
Together.
Well, let's well, I guess we can combine them.
So that's for so
And by the way, if any of you guys online have any questions, you can ask in the chat, and I'll answer while we're still all here. You can ask about anything.
Well, when can I get
Yeah, maybe next week. Yeah.
Send Venmo now, or to like bring cash or check?
I have cash.
Cash or check is ideal, but Venmo works as well. I can put my Venmo on the. Yeah. Yeah, I would rather wait. Yeah, because now Venmo is like, Venmo, as of this year, there's a new law that Venmo transactions are reported. The IRS monitors. They can, yeah. So it's taxed basically.
$80.
Oh, thank you. And remind me your name.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. What's your last initial?
T.
Okay.
These ones are every week then?
Yeah, every Thursday, 7 to 9. And if you can attend 1 week in person, you can do Zoom attendance. Yeah. And then there's the Zoom recording as well.
Elizabeth, is your time just please?
Let's tell your comments like your friends going to.
Oh, yeah, it is. But I know you're eating stuff, right? For diapers. I know I bet you some medicines when we work on people, you know? Yeah, this will help me.
I never showed, for those of you who are online, you never saw across the aisle here. There's only a few left, everyone mostly left, but this is in person attendance crowd, a couple people left. But yeah, more people, and then all this money underneath the laptop. Like our test, but
Okay, guys, I just have to like briefly introduce you to my friend Alex Carlos. If you don't know Alex, who knows Alex? Just yeah, anyway, Alex was very influential in my life. I met him 6 years ago, and I'll tell you, Alex can read people. He wrote a book, it's like this thing called Recognizing People. He can read you and tell you your personality within about 30 seconds of seeing you, and he's like that on record. It's based scientifically on what's it called?
There's a lot of science. The phenotype and the phenotype.
It's like your features, it's the way you move, it's a lot of things.